Today on Words and Numbers, visas,
artificial intelligence and legislation,
$2,000 checks for everybody, well, almost,
and a 50-year mortgage.
All this and more on Words and Numbers coming up next. We are a Civil original production. Check us out at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.
Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
Ant, it's new and exciting in your world this week.
I ran across a joke, I don't know, maybe a year or more ago as AI was
You
just
know a
becoming a
joke?
thing. Yeah.
Are you going to tell it?
I have a friend who's a specialist in humor in advertising, and he said that there's two types of people: the consumers of humor and the generators of humor. I'm clearly a consumer. I can't remember a punchline to save my life.
This is why we get along so well.
But in this joke, it's one of these cartoon things. You've got a person in an office writing bullet points. Then he gives it to the AI and tells the AI to craft an email based on these bullet points. Sends the email. Then you see another guy in the office receiving the email and pasting it into an AI saying, summarize this in bullet points.
Bullet points, please, Champion.
Right. That came to mind as I was having a conversation with some people that are in the industry that I am in currently. And they were having a problem with their state legislature considering a bill that was going to impact them. And the bill apparently was very complicated, involved lots of things and so forth. And somebody said in passing, well, we can just take the bill and put it into AI and ask AI to summarize it. And a couple of the guys there said, oh, yeah, of course you can. And a couple of guys said, oh, my God, can you really do that? And so it was an interesting thing. And as I'm listening to them talk about this, it occurred to me that on the one hand, you can certainly use AI to summarize legislation. I'm thinking back to Nancy Pelosi and the...
Right, we've got to pass the bill to see what's in it.
Yeah, the Affordable Care Act, where she said, in all seriousness, that they have to pass the bill in order to figure out what's in the bill.
What's in the bill. And it turns out, just by the by, that it did not make health care affordable.
No, it did pretty much everything it promised to do, it did not do. It did the opposite.
It did the opposite. It did the opposite.
Yeah.
And if only a couple of guys could have predicted exactly that. Oh wait, it was us.
Check the link in the show notes for our op-ed. But in Nancy's case, what she was saying, in a sense, made sense, that the bill was so complicated that they didn't know what it would do until it was implemented and you could see all of the pieces working. Of course, that's a horrible way to legislate.
We should stop for a minute and explain why that is. You've got a bunch of people in Congress, in their committees, what have you, everybody angling to get a certain bit of text into the bill, and all those bits of text add up. And before you know it, you've got 3,000 pages.
Oh, it's even worse. They don't just add up, they interact in ways that no one anticipated.
And that's right. There are always these sorts of consequences, but it's obvious how this happens, right? You put 435 people in a room and say, come up with something. Well, God help us all, they do. And they all come up with different things, and they all add together, and then you end up with literally 3,000 pages, and then that comes to a vote without giving enough time for human beings to read 3,000 pages.
Yep.
That's why Nancy Pelosi said we have to pass it to see what's in it, because there was literally no time for anybody to read it beyond the bits they stuck in themselves.
And that's where
to find out that this fails should confound no one.
That's where the interaction of the various pieces matters, because you could imagine, okay, you've got congressional staff. So you get this 3,000-page document, you've got 30 staffers, divided up, whatever that is, 100 pages per staffer. You guys go read this, come back to me. The problem is, even if each one of them understands the 100 pages they've been given, they don't know what the other pages say, and so they miss all the potential interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in any event, this brings us back to AI, and yeah, you could use AI to summarize the legislation. Just feed the whole thing to AI, and You can have it come back and say, okay, here's the major bullet points. You can even do better than that if you like, is don't have it summarize it, just ask it questions. What's this going to do to my healthcare premiums or whatever it is? And as I'm thinking about this, listening to this conversation go on, it occurs to me that the mere fact that we can do that is going to create an incentive for legislators to produce longer legislation, because it becomes easier to deal with long legislation because you've got AI. So why 10,000, 2,000 pages? Don't stop at that. Give us 10,000 pages. AI can digest that just as easily. And then that led me to my next thought, which really disturbed me. When the document gets that large, it's easy enough already to hide stuff in there. I mean, that's, with the 2,000 pages, you don't know what's in there. You could hide things in there that are handouts to your constituents, and you're hoping nobody else notices it. Of course, with AI, it's easier to notice it because AI can look for these things. But I went to AI itself and I asked, suppose I'm writing a piece of legislation, and I know that this legislation, when completed, will be given to an AI, and the AI will be asked to summarize it. There are portions of the legislation I don't want anyone to notice. How can I craft the wording so that the AI that scans it does not pick up and therefore summarize the passages that I want to hide? And as you might imagine, the AI comes back to me and says, well, that's unethical and I can't comment on that and blah, blah, blah. To which I said, all right, cut it out. This is a hypothetical. I'm interested in this as a thought experiment, so I had to beat on it a little bit. But finally, it comes back and it says, yes, indeed, this is possible. And here's how you do it. And it starts to describe this, that you write the passages as you couch them in phrases that make it look like this is an incidental, it's a parenthetical, it doesn't matter. Oh, by the way, this. But this is the important thing, but you say, oh, by the way, and the AI is going to ignore it. So this, I project, is the future of legislation in the age of AI. Hundreds of thousands of pages of legislation with this ongoing battle of the one side using AI to try and ferret out what's actually in the bill, and the other side using AI to try and hide what they're putting in it.
So as usual, we're left with the observation that politicians make everything worse.
Oh, and on AI, it's like steroids, right? They're really going to make it worse.
This is just their new tool to make it worse, but they're the problem. I've got something I don't think I can say a little smaller for reasons that will become obvious in a moment, but the Trump administration, and I guess today we're going to be feeding our critics who refer to us as having Trump derangement syndrome, because he's going to come up with...
Fire up that email. James needs some good hate mail.
Get the email rolling. I have been bored lately. But the administration has put out some new regulations about who is and who is not allowed to have a visa to travel into the United States. And it's largely quite reasonable, right? When you read through it, and there's people with this health condition or that, right? And, you don't want people with the bubonic plague or whatever traveling into the country. So that all seems reasonable enough. But at the bottom of the list of people who you can legitimately turn away when applying for a visa are the obese.
Really? The obese?
Yeah, we don't want fat people coming to visit.
I think we got a pot calling the kettle black here or something.
Well,
aren't we considered the most obese people on the planet?
I don't know if that holds anymore. I mean,
oh really?
We're way up there, but other places have gotten quite large over the years. And interesting quick story: an Iraqi student came to visit me once in the early 2010s. And I took her to a Walmart, and she asked, what are those? Pointing to those carts that the big fat people ride on when they get there. And she said, let me get this straight. People are so fat, here that they need a cart to ride through the store to buy more food. And I said, yes, I'm afraid that's correct. And she shook her head like somebody from a third world country would. And about 7 or 8 years later, I got a message from her saying our grocery stores are getting those carts now.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So it's even in the third world, or the developing world is the term we're supposed to use now. You find the same thing. But the administration, England has gotten quite large as well. They used to make fun of us for being a gigantic people, and now they're every bit as gigantic. And, look, we all know this. When you and I were children, if you met somebody that weighed 280, 300 pounds, that was the fattest man you ever met in your whole life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I know dozens of people who weigh 300 pounds now. Dozens. So, things have changed. But the reason why they don't want the obese to come visit is because they might have to go to the hospital and gobble up all of our valuable health care. I just leave it out there.
I can see the argument, but
It's an interesting thing that I saw in the news that I never expected I would see in the news.
we're happy to announce that Civil members can join me and James for a new lecture series, Words and Numbers Live. Words and Numbers Live is a members-only series in which James and I talk about issues in politics, philosophy, and economics. We take a deeper dive and then invite listeners for a live Q&A session. You can also submit your questions for us at wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com. In the next session, which starts Thursday, November 20th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, we examine public choice economics. To participate in this exclusive series, subscribe to Civil at civil.com. That's CIVL.com. When you log into civil.com, you'll find an archive of our past lecture series, as well as the collection of all our episodes of Words and Numbers, as well as announcements about upcoming lectures in our new Words and Numbers Live series. Subscribe to Civil for $5 a month or $50 for an annual subscription.
Which brings us to the foolishness of the week. And this is so foolish that I actually gave Anthony some math homework so we could talk about it like rational people.
Well, it's so in depth. I thought it was the main episode until just a moment ago. You said it's the foolishness.
Yeah. No, this will just take about a minute, and then there'll be more foolishness in the main episode, without question. But Donald Trump just recently, and you might be able to spot this one a mile away, Ant, but he got it in his heart to start telling people that tariffs are so great. And as we speak, the Supreme Court heard the tariff case just a couple of days ago, and it did not go well for the administration. So take everything he says with a grain of salt, because he probably, if he's a reasonable human being, he knows that the tariffs are about to be declared unconstitutional. That's my prediction from what I've been able to glean from the court case. And I suspect it's 6-3 or 7-2. I don't think it's going to be a particularly close decision. And so, okay, he comes out on Truth Social and he says, tariffs are so great. And if you don't love tariffs, you're a fool, he says. And because tariffs are so great, we're going to send everybody, except the filthy rich, of course, we're going to send everybody a check for $2,000. So my first question was to Anthony, how much is that going to cost? And then my second question to Anthony was, okay, go figure out how much we've taken in on the tariffs. Okay, Ant, the floor is yours.
What we took in fiscal year 2025, which the government's fiscal year ends September 30. So from when the tariff started till September 30, 195 billion. However, it's once they ramped up, the tariff revenue was coming in at about 30 billion a year. So if they continued, it would be $360 billion a year.
That's a lot of money.
360 billion. Yeah.
And then again, it isn't.
Well, yeah, right. Where the government's concerned, it's not. But there's a lot of footnotes here. One footnote is that estimates are that consumers pay at least half of those tariffs, at least half. So that means that, on the one hand, he's saying, okay, we're collecting $360 billion. On the other hand, half of that, 180 billion, is coming out of the pockets of consumers in the form of higher prices. And then roughly 40%, estimated, of course, is being paid by companies in the form of U.S. companies in the form of lower profits. So that's 90% being paid by Americans, either Americans at the point of sale when you buy the thing, or in terms of lesser returns on your savings investment because the companies you're invested in are earning less. So 90% of the tariff is being paid by Americans.
Well, but we told everybody that was going to happen, and it did. I mean, there's no surprise there.
Yeah, but where the check comes in, things start to get kind of interesting. So he says, cut everybody a $2,000 check. And that statement is not as clear as it might seem. And I couldn't find an answer to it, because when he says cut every American $2,000 check, does he really mean every American, because there are 340 million of us? Or does he mean every household, because there's 130 million of those? Or does he mean every taxpayer, because some households have more than one taxpayer? There's 160 million of those. I assumed that he meant taxpayer. So take that.
I don't know. And the only thing I have to go by here is how we went about sending out checks, roughly the same amount as if memory serves, during COVID.
You think it's going to be per person?
That's the vibe I take. Look, I think it's never going to happen. Because once the Supreme Court intervenes, all the tariffs have to be returned, which is going to be a fiasco to end all fiascos.
Right.
But working with what we've got in front of us, I think the only way to read it is every person. And I think you might have to read it as every adult person. You might read it as every taxpayer. But he said everybody, but then he said not the rich.
Oh, not the rich. Right. So the way the numbers break down, because you want to take the rich off the table, and even then, it's unclear what does he mean by the rich. Does he mean the billionaires, the top 1%, the top 20%?
I would assume that what we're looking at here is everybody through the upper middle class.
Upper middle class. Okay, so let's say
so that would be
the top 20%.
4 quintiles.
Oh, I want
to remove 1 quintile.
The middle class, the upper middle class. Okay, so you want the middle class, the next one down, the next one down. So the top 40% out.
I think the top 20% out.
Okay, that's what I had. Yeah, a top 20% out, and going by number of taxpayers.
Well, that's going to
want people. I can do people.
I don't know, right? Because my knee-jerk reaction is, well, everybody on Social Security is going to have a problem, but then they are taxpayers, right? They pay tax on their Social Security, so that takes care of that.
I mean, what's happening here, and this will become clear in a moment, is this is basically angels dancing on a head to pin, and we're debating whether they should hop on 1 foot or they can use both feet. Yeah, right? It doesn't matter.
Go ahead, do your math thing.
But roughly speaking, the $2,000 check to all of the people, however you define that and however you define all, roughly plus or minus some, it comes out to be about what the government would collect annually, the $360 billion, which means at the end of the day, the only thing that's happened is the government has collected a bunch of money through tariffs, and the government's going to turn around and hand it all back out again.
Yeah.
So we're getting back all of our money, except that the government was in the middle of the whole transaction.
It's a redistribution of the money, right?
There is some redistribution, granted.
So there's that, and then there's the government control, and this is clearly for the buying of votes later.
That makes me very nervous. Just like in the Biden years, they were talking about student loan forgiveness, and we said at the time,
that's right.
This is a clear buy-off of college students. Mm-hmm. We're just going to take money from taxpayers, hand it to college students, so they vote for us.
And that's exactly what would have happened.
Yeah, except they lost the election. I submit, however, there's a political gambit here. I think, as strange as some of President Trump's ideas are, I think that there's a lot more thought behind them than we might think at first. I submit that this is a political gambit to pressure the Supreme Court.
Oh, I think it's clearly that.
Because
Clearly.
if the Supreme Court rules that the tariffs are indeed unconstitutional, Trump says, well, those $2,000 checks, the Supreme Court just shot you in the foot. Now everybody's mad, and the Supreme Court knows this.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. Those tariffs are going to have to be returned.
Oh, if the tariffs are found to be unconstitutional, they will likely have to be returned. Of course, I would imagine there's another court case that's involved there.
And how in God's name are you going to accomplish that?
Oh, see, that's the weirdness. They will get returned not to the entities that actually paid them, but to the entities
to
from
the vendors.
which they were collected.
Where they were collected. So that means the corporations are going to get money back. I think that as far as Trump goes, this is very shrewd politics.
Mm-hmm.
Very shrewd. And he gets to walk away the hero literally no matter what the outcome.
Yeah.
And that's pretty smart.
I did think there were a couple of things I thought were really funny that came out of this. One was the Treasury Secretary apparently tripping over himself to walk back this whole thing. It was him saying, well, there are lots of ways you might pay a dividend. Treasury Secretary imagining paying a $2,000 check to every American.
Well, I mean, look, you saw how difficult it is to figure out what that even means.
Right, yes. Yeah.
Look, we kind of do this for a living, and we can't figure out what that means.
And you brought up the COVID checks, which is an interesting thing. If you recall, in the age of COVID, when they were cutting checks and giving out money to businesses and all of that, it got so complicated because they're given to everybody that basically they're just giving money. You could walk up and say, look, I haven't got my money yet. And they say, here, have some money. And off you go. There's tremendous wastage.
We predicted at the time that would yield tremendous inflation. And everybody said, it'll be fine.
Right. The MMTers were all out saying, where's the inflation? Where's the inflation? And then 2022 hit, and the MMTers are all gone.
And I want to know where the MMTers are.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm not done poking fun. One of the things that I believe the president said is that, with all this tariff revenue, we can pay down the debt.
Well, apparently not.
It does not come close to being enough money to do that.
Oh, even if they didn't cut a $2,000 check to every taxpayer in the United States and instead kept that money in the government coffers, the budget would not be balanced.
Oh, right. The tariff revenue needs to be about 6 times what it currently is just to get us to a balanced budget. And from that point forward, then you can start paying down the debt.
Never going to happen.
Yeah, so it's 1/6 the size of what's necessary to get us to zero. Forget about paying down any debts.
And I don't think people will fully comprehend what 1/6 actually means. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so the annual tariff revenue on an annualized basis, $360 billion. The deficit this year, I believe, is $2.1 trillion, or ballpark $2 trillion.
You're using numbers they're not going to get. If they went out to buy a car,
Oh,
what would it mean then? What would it mean to buy groceries?
do you mean in terms of what? Oh, you mean you want me to scale this down to like the size of a household?
Yeah, but I want to hear what 6/6 looks like at the ground level.
The $360 billion. Oh no, the $2 trillion.
Look, if we have to have if we're only collecting 1/6 now, and we all know that prices have gone up tremendously.
Oh,
as a result.
Oh, I see.
What would prices look like if it went up to the 6/6 that would be necessary to balance the budget?
Oh, in other words, what would happen if what would be required for the tariff revenue to be the full $2 trillion?
That's right. What would it cost regular
Yeah,
people?
basically infinity, because you can't jack the tariff rates that high. At some point, the tariff rate becomes so high that we just give up buying things from foreigners entirely, and there is no tariff revenue.
So no matter what,
that point's going to come before we ever get to the $2 trillion that we need to balance the budget.
so no matter what, it's not going to work.
But it ain't happening.
But if we tried to make it work, every time you walked into a grocery store, you would only find products that were grown in the United States.
Yes, right. All foreign things would be, and not just products that are only grown in the United States. You would only find products whose inputs were grown or manufactured in the United States. So if you need a combine to harvest your wheat, but the combine is made in Brazil, no wheat for you.
No wheat for you.
Yeah.
So people would literally starve. That's how well tariffs work.
Yeah, now, let me say, because people have said to me before, yeah, but once upon a time, the United States, the federal government survived on tariff revenue alone. In fact, once upon a time, the United States survived on United States farmers alone.
Mm-hmm.
Except at the time, there were probably, I'm guessing, 1% of the number of Americans that there are today.
That's about right, actually. The best estimates, and they are only estimates, but the best estimates prior to the census of 1790 were that there were about 3.5 million people.
Yeah, 1/10 of what we have,
1%.
or 1/100th of what we have now.
And if you remember, when we had Phil Magnus on to talk about tariffs when they first became a political hot potato, he said something that resonated with me and that I repeat a lot now. Tariffs are great if you're a small nation and you have a lot of coastline, because your trade comes in and you could tax it at the point where it enters, and then you don't have to have a gigantic administration to tax literally anything else. So if you're Jamaica, tariffs might work just fine.
Right.
But if you're Canada or the United States or Mexico, oh God, come on. No, it's not going to be fine. Right. And it gets way more complicated the bigger you get and the more interconnected your economies get. And people now say idiotic things like globalism is a bad thing and we have to rely only upon ourselves. Oh my God, globalism made all of our lives so much better.
It did. You know, and when I first started doing public speaking back in the early 2000s, globalization was like the buzzword, and everyone was so excited because countries that had been for as long as humans have existed underdeveloped countries, all of a sudden through globalization were becoming modernized.
Yep. And we don't want that, apparently.
Yeah.
No. All right. Well, let's move on to something that we do want, and this could have easily been the foolishness of the week itself, I think. But we're going back to our commander-in-chief, who has decided that the answer to what is, I think, a pretty vexing problem, the fact that young people, and it's not even really young people, but people in their mid to late 30s even, cannot afford to purchase a home because they've gotten so expensive. And rather than, I mean, look, any economist will tell you if houses are too expensive, if rent is too high, your problem is that you don't have enough supply. Build more. But then people say, no. You can build more, just not here. And, well, okay. You've decided you don't want more, which means the ones you have will all cost more. This is very simple, basic Econ 101, right? You learn this your first week of economics.
And here's a general rule I use with politicians. Whenever a politician comes along and says, look, here's an idea that's going to make everybody better off, when the idea has something involving the economy, take a deep breath, because if this idea really were as good as the politician thinks and practicable, and by that I mean that whatever frictions are involved are small enough versus the benefit that people are better off. If indeed that's the case, the market will have already come up with it. The fact that the market hasn't come up with it tells me that there's something else. Either the politician has overlooked some problem that indeed exists, or alternatively, the politician himself is the problem, not himself, but the government itself is the problem by preventing the market from doing this thing.
And it's almost always that second thing.
Yeah, often it is. And I've often recommended that people who are serious about policy solutions to things, that the first place you should look when you see a problem is not to what the government can do to solve the problem, but to what the government can stop doing that's contributing to the problem.
Well, so right now with housing, we've got a couple of different problems, right? The first one is obvious. It's price. Prices on houses have gone up considerably.
Mm-hmm.
And very recently. I think if you look at the price of housing over the mid to long term, it's pretty linear. You can kind of predict it. But if you look at it just in the last 6-8 years, we've had a bit of a run up in terms of prices. All right, set that to the side. And now we've got a problem because mortgage rates are very high.
Right.
Right. We're looking at 7 to 8%. And that makes a gigantic difference regarding the monthly payment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Can you do some quick math on, let's call it a $400,000 house, a 30-year mortgage, fixed rate, 6.5%?
6.5 you want.
I do.
6.5%, 400,000, which is about, as I recall, that's about the median price.
It's median-ish.
Yeah. And I don't even think that's for a new home. I think that's just the average home that's been sold.
That's median-ish. And 6.5 right now would be a pretty good rate if you could get it.
Yeah, your payment there, and bear in mind, this is only the mortgage payment. It doesn't include the what do you call that, PMI, mortgage insurance. The mortgage insurance, it doesn't include
home
property
insurance,
tax, home insurance.
The whole bit.
Yeah, none of that stuff. But just to pay mortgage payment, $2,500 a month.
And that's
30-year mortgage.
A lot of money. That's a lot of money, yeah.
Yeah, so if you take the median household, I believe, is making $85,000. So take $85,000. Let's assume that 20% taxes. So that leaves net of $68,000, and those payments are running. The payments are they're 45% of the take-home pay. 45% of your take-home pay would go just to the mortgage. Yeah.
And there was a time, Ant, when if you walked into a bank and that was the reality, no bank would give you a mortgage.
Right.
The rule of thumb for years and years and years was 25% of your gross.
25%. The mortgage payment had to be 25% of your gross. I see.
25% of your gross.
Yeah, but you know what was also a thing for many years, and it started to stop being a thing when I bought my first house, and that is the down payment. It was the case, in my parents' time and earlier, that a bank wouldn't even talk to you if you didn't have at least 20% cash in hand to put down on the thing.
20% is still the magic number. That gets you out of mortgage insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put down 20%, you don't have to pay mortgage insurance.
Yeah, but I don't know what the numbers are. I wonder how many people actually do that anymore.
I have been polling realtors lately on exactly this, and the answer to the 20% question is approaching zero.
Yeah, that's what I would figure.
Vanishingly small.
Yeah.
They tell me that most people barely put down 5%.
Yep, that squares with my experience.
So Donald Trump has inserted himself into this set of circumstances. And remember, one of his goals is to get the Fed to lower interest rates. That's always lurking in the background, right? Because the higher interest rates go, the more the government has to pay on the interest on the debt, the less it has to pay anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So interest rates are exceedingly important to politicians. And everybody in an executive function would want them to be 0%.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That would be ideal for them. Now, markets don't particularly care for 0% because you don't make a lot of money on 0% loans. But you understand the larger point here. Politicians want it to be as small as it can possibly be, regardless of what market forces would dictate.
Yeah, and they don't. It's not that they want it to be lower because it would be good for the voters. They want it to be lower because it would be good for the federal government.
Good for them.
Yeah.
So lurking behind any conversation about mortgages and interest rates is the other goal of getting the Fed to lower interest rates.
Yeah.
Which would ultimately trickle into the mortgage industry. But that's neither here nor there for the conversation we're about to have. Because right now, the standard for buying a house is a 30-year fixed mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what you aim for. Fixed meaning the percentage does never change. If you get a 5% loan, it's fixed. It stays 5% for the life of the loan. You can get an adjustable rate loan, which typically is a point or two lower, but it has a lot of volatility built into it.
Yeah, and I'll tell people, and I'll preface it by saying I'm not a financial advisor, so do with this what you will, but an adjustable rate loan is not a good idea unless you are very confident that you'll be selling the house within 5 years.
Yeah, just a little bit. Or if you happen to know with relative certainty that you've got a lot of money coming in soon.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you want to just buy the house now and pay it off in a year when all your contracts or some such thing get paid, okay, then take the lower rate, keep it for a year and pay it off.
Because I've heard horror stories of relatively intelligent people who just don't understand the finance getting an adjustable rate mortgage because it's a much lower rate and lower monthly payments and all of this, not realizing that 5 years down the road it adjusts and it's likely going to adjust high, and all of a sudden you're stuck with mortgage payments you can't afford.
And to give you an idea of what you can face, 5 years ago you could have gotten a 2.8% loan, which means an adjustable loan was probably under 2.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's over 7.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference there might be the difference of living in a house and having it foreclosed.
Yeah,
that's how people lose That's how people lose houses. They make bad decisions and they can't follow through on the financing.
Let's go back to the 50-year mortgage.
Well, I don't think we even talked about it yet, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said it as the title of the episode. It slipped my mind. You haven't said anything about it.
This is the new answer, right? That Trump is pushing, and we'll see how far it gets. We'll see what kind of traction he gets with this. But he's saying what we could do to get more young people to the point where they can afford homes is to stretch the mortgage from 30 to 50 years. Now, 50 years on a loan is a very, very long time.
And let me remind everybody that if this were a good idea, banks would already be doing it. That they're not tells me there's something here that we're missing, or that the president's missing.
When I did the mortgage on the house I'm in right now, my goal was to get a 15-year.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, because the payments are a bit higher, but the rate is much lower. And I just couldn't pull it off. I needed it to be the standard 30. And a lot of people end up falling into that category, right? That you can, when you look at what you can accomplish, 30 years is about what you need to do.
Yeah, because when you start talking about 50 years, unless you're buying the house when you're 20 years old, you're going to be still making mortgage payments well into retirement.
Yeah, and I've got a graphic that we'll throw up that'll shed a little bit of light on this. it's not as good as you might think. It does. Let me rephrase that. It doesn't make as big a difference on your monthly payment as you might think.
Yes.
And you can run the numbers yourself, Ant, but the graphic that I've got compares a 30-year mortgage, including the monthly payment and the P&I payment. And the 30-year is $2,463, and the 50-year is $2,180.
Yeah, that's ballpark what I'm looking at here.
You're saving about $285.
Yeah, I have, leaving PMI out of it, I have a saving, I have your payments being about 11% less. 11%. But interestingly, that's at a 6.5% mortgage rate. If the mortgage rate were 5%, your payments go down by 15%. If it was 3%, your payments are down by almost 25%. So the higher the interest rate is, the worse of a deal the 50-year mortgage is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a great deal no matter what, for one very simple reason. Most people who would be inclined to sign that deal are likely not going to live until the end of it.
Right.
There is going to be a substantial risk on the lender side. And it might be risk of a sort that you have to have mortgage insurance for a 50-year mortgage, for all 50 years, which would drive the price up. That's something that hasn't been fleshed out in the market yet, but it will be. Because if you're taking loans, and look, man, I took out a mortgage that I will clearly not live to the end of this term that I have in this house. I clearly won't. And everybody knew it the day I signed it. So the market has figured out that that's not exactly a problem, but maybe it's a problem if everybody gets a 50-year mortgage.
Yeah, well, part of what's going through the banker's mind is that regardless of how long you live, they're banking on you selling the house.
That's right, and that it will have appreciated over that time, or in my estate, right? Something like that.
But let me point out here, people complain about, well, they don't want to pay rent. They want to own the house. Well, at a 50-year mortgage, you might as well be paying rent. You're going to be paying your entire life.
Not only are you paying rent, you're fixing everything that goes wrong, which is one of the reasons to rent, right? Over 50 years, you're going to put up, if you live in Arizona, 8 new roofs. The sun beats down hard on the roofs here, and they have to be recoated every couple of years. Ouch. Who knew? Air conditioners are way more expensive than I thought would even be possible. But try to live here without them.
Yep.
Good luck with that. And you know, if you're renting, you don't pay any of this. I mean, you do. It's just kind of hidden in your rent.
Right. It's hidden in your rent. And the thing you get with rent is the ability to walk away at a moment's notice.
That and predictability.
Predictability. What renters often, I find, don't appreciate is the frictional cost of buying a house. That anytime you buy or sell a house, you've got, yes, of course, the price of the house and all of that, but then there's the brokerage fee and the bank's fees and the lending fee and all this stuff. So when you're done, it's that those fees will eat like 3 or 4 years worth of principal payments.
Well, here's the thing. I talked to a realtor about this recently, and I said, just off the top of your head, what percentage of the sale price does the seller not get? And he said, about 7%. Between all the closing costs, all the various fees, you're going to lose 7%.
Yeah.
That's a colossal amount of money on a house.
Yeah.
Colossal. It means most people who sell their house are going to break even on a good day.
If you held the house for 20 years and it appreciated, okay, 7% hit isn't that bad. But if you just bought the thing 5 years ago, now you got a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, that's painful.
James and I are delighted to be working with Civil. For years, we have been pushing people to think about how we can make the world a better place. Civil's mission of upgrading society fits exactly with what James and I have been talking about for years. Civil helps us by allowing us to do what we do best, which is researching topics that are important and communicating these to our listeners in ways that we hope they find enjoyable. To see Civil's extensive list of content, including our podcast, Words and Numbers, and our new lecture series, Words and Numbers Live, visit civil.com. That's CIVL.com. I want to talk about the interest for a minute. Let's go back to your example of the $400,000 house at 6.5% interest, 30 years versus 50 years. And on the one hand, in terms of the payment, I have monthly payment, $2,500 for the 30-year mortgage, $2,300 for the 50-year mortgage. So you said $200 difference. That's about
Couple
right.
$100, yeah.
Not a big deal. Here's where the big deal comes in. Over the life of the loan, that 30-year loan, you will have paid a total of $500,000 in interest for the 30-year loan. For the 50-year loan.
Let's stop and take a breath. That's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. Now, it's spread over 30 years and, it's in the future and all of that, but it's $500,000.
The interest is worth more than the house itself was the day you bought it.
Yeah. Yes.
You pay $500,000 interest and $400,000 principal, which means your $400,000 house just cost you $900-something thousand.
And to people who, and I've seen this, say, well, look, this is a racket. Why? I bought a $500,000 house. How come I have $400,000 house? How come I have $500,000 in interest? And the answer is because you got the house now instead of waiting 30 years. That's
30
what
years,
the interest is paying for.
And after we're done going through the 50-year mortgage, I've got something to say on that point. But what's the interest look like on the 50-year?
Back to the interest. 30-year mortgage, total interest, $500,000, $500,000. For the 50-year mortgage, total interest, $950,000. Almost 90% more interest for the 50-year mortgage versus the 30-year.
My goodness.
Yeah, I mean, on that delta of $400,000, I mean, you could almost retire on that if you put it into your portfolio.
If you had it.
Right. Yeah.
You might not have a place to live if you did that. Right.
And this makes me wonder if, again, this is a political gambit, because it looks so good on the front end. You don't realize until decades down the road what a bad deal this is.
Well,
of course, decades down the road, current politicians will be gone.
Anybody should be able to look at the two deals and say, why would I add 20 years to the payments to save $200 a month?
Right.
Right. That's just the simplicity of it all.
And this is what makes me so mad, that I have seen it with with real estate people. I see a lot more with car dealers.
Cars. Yep. Cars.
You walk in and they immediately go to, how much do you want to pay a month? How much can you afford?
Right.
That is the exact wrong question.
You should never, and if you're out buying a car, you shouldn't answer that question. The only thing that matters is the cost of the car. The rest is a shell game.
Well, yeah, in fact, let me say it. It's a two-step process. Step number 1, settle on the price of the car. The price of the car. Yep. Step number 2, once you got the price, now let's negotiate financing. And that's when you start asking, how much do you want to pay a month?
And little known fact, you don't have to get your financing at the car dealership.
Right. Yeah.
Go to your credit union and see what they can do. You might get a much better deal.
Yeah.
They certainly won't take advantage of you like a car dealer would. But anyway, the more interesting thing here, Ant, is when we were young, right up until about, 10 years ago, you bought a car and you spaced it out over 5 years, generally.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A car loan was always figured at 5 years.
Right.
They're up to 7.
Yeah, see, that's
72 months on a car. And cars don't last 7 years.
Right. So you can end up still owing money on nothing. There's nothing there, and you owe money on
Or
it.
you're not driving. And people, they get all excited and puffy chested saying, look at my new car. And they get these, the ginormous pickup trucks and with all the bells and whistles. Do you know that you could spend $110,000 on what I would consider a run-of-the-mill pickup truck?
Yeah.
And then you could finance it over 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck to you.
Yeah.
Good luck. Because payments add up in a life. If you have 2 car payments, you're going to add a mortgage payment to that? What other things do you pay for every month? Because as a homeowner, you're going to have other monthly bills. Like electricity and water and all things like this that turn out to be really good ideas.
Yeah, before you ever get to Netflix.
That's right. That last $12 or whatever Netflix costs now, I don't know because we canceled it, right? If you're not watching it, why do you have it?
Mm-hmm.
And we said, yeah, Netflix can go. But I can't do that with the electric bill. Certainly can't do it with the water bill. And when you start looking at committing yourself to something for 50 years, I would be very reticent to do it. Mm-hmm. Now, let's take a giant step backwards. If the interest rate you can get on the loan is something that is so low that you can do better in a money market account or some such thing, you should take that loan out every day of the week.
You should. I agree with you 100%, but I warn people. Let's suppose there's a $400,000 house you're looking at, and you can get it instead of 6.5%, which is $2,500 a month, we'll give you 3%, which is $1,600 a month. You're $1,000 a month better off. Now,
yep, there you go.
You're absolutely right. You take that 3%, finance the whole thing, and that extra $1,000 a month, you put it into stocks, you put it into bonds.
You could put it into a high rent savings account and do better than 3%.
The problem here is what people often do is they'll jack up the house. Well, now I can afford 4 bedrooms instead of 3 and the pool.
That's
and before you know it, you're back up to $2,500 a month. It's just on a bigger house.
On a bigger house, that's right. And this is why when markets get like they are right now, where prices are high and interest rates are high, people are looking at much smaller homes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because that's all they can afford.
Yep.
And politicians know that, and they know that it's upsetting to people when that's all they can afford. Everybody wants to live in a house better than the one they grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been occurring generation after generation in the U.S. since probably throughout our entire history. And we finally reached a tipping point on that, and we've got generations now that are downsizing instead of upsizing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's making them angry. And I understand. 50 years isn't the answer.
Whatever happened to the tiny house movement? I thought that was so cool. But they seem to have petered out.
But it turns out nobody wants to live in those damn things. I mean, look, I want one, but I want to turn it into my office. Right? It's great for something like that. It's great to have as an adjunct to your house when people come to visit for 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you could say, go in the back now.
Mm-hmm.
We've had dinner, get out. But, I mean, do you really want to live in 600 square feet?
Yeah, but see, that's the thing. It seems so cozy.
400?
You see it on YouTube. But if you're doing it day after day, I'm sure it becomes annoying.
Given the choice, I would rather live in a warehouse than a tiny house. If I had to pick one or the other, I'm going warehouse every time. Aesthetics be damned. Look, the $2,000 check thing earlier, that was fun because you and I both know it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be an intervening variable there that keeps that from occurring. That's not to say that they won't find some other way to get $2,000 checks out to buy more votes later. That's what politicians do. This is just a particularly brazen version of that. This actually, the 50-year mortgage, might happen.
I don't know what politicians would do to make it happen because banks could go ahead and offer 50-year mortgages now.
Well, they could regulate it into existence.
They could require it.
That's right.
Yeah, see, now there's a problem, because if they're going to require it, that means that there's some cost that's being imposed,
That's correct.
because otherwise
be
banks would be
reflected.
offering it on their own.
That will be reflected in the interest rates that get offered.
Yep.
Not only
Yep.
at the 50-year level, but at every level,
Mm-hmm.
because it's increased risk to the lender,
Right.
and that always yields higher interest rates. That's what interest rates are. It's an assessment of the risk of the loan.
And speaking of which, that annoyed me from the time I bought my first house. That, we got this little thing in the hills of West Virginia, as much as you could scrape together on a assistant professor's salary. And we had to get mortgage insurance on the thing. And so I'm asking, well, what is this thing, the mortgage insurance? And they said, well, of course, if you, don't make the payments, the bank repossesses or what have you, the mortgage insurance insures the bank, so it gets its money back. I didn't know enough about the world to understand what mortgage insurance was until they told me. But I did know enough about economics to know what a riskless interest rate is. And it seemed to me that the PMI, the mortgage insurance, made the loan riskless to the bank.
That's
And if
right.
that was the case, how come I wasn't paying treasury rates on this thing, the same interest rate that the government pays for its riskless debt?
Because the bank had to make a profit on you.
Oh, maybe that's it. The bank had to make a profit, right? Yeah. Yeah.
There's always that, right? Look,
Mhm.
banks aren't doing a public service by offering mortgages. They're selling a product.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because I have a note here and I forgot about it. That's something that I've seen way too many intelligent people get wrong. They think that they're borrowing money from the bank, and the bank is being evil because it wants all this interest. You are not borrowing money from the bank. You're borrowing money from other people in your community who have put their savings into the bank. It's the savings that's being loaned to you. The bank's simply a middleman.
And if you can't grasp this intuitively, go watch It's a Wonderful Life. We're getting to Christmas time. It'll be It'll be on TV. The last scene explains exactly this in graphic detail.
Yep.
In a very entertaining way, which seems impossible given the topic at hand. But I want to go a step further and talk about what mortgages and loans more generally allow. Because most people in the United States could not conceive of a life without the product loans, in the form of auto loans, in the form of home loans, whatever. They allow you to, for lack of a better word, mortgage your future, right? You're looking at what you will be able to afford over time, not what you can afford today. Because outside of misusing a credit card, people don't take out loans to buy the week's groceries. You just go and you buy them. They're inexpensive. It's in the grand scheme of things. It's not something you have to sit and plan the same way you have to plan a home or a car. You need a home, one way or the other. You have to have a roof over your head or you will die. Generally speaking, you also need an automobile of some sort to get from where you sleep at night to where you work during the day. But at most points in your life, you can't pay cash for these things.
Right.
They're expensive. Now, you can pay more or less, but you probably can't just afford to walk out and say, today I'm going to buy a house. Here, take all this money.
Yeah, and let me polish that a little bit. You can afford it in the sense that you could save up your money and pay for it. But the problem is,
Then you got
where
no place to
do
live.
I sleep in the meantime? How do I get to work in the meantime?
And there are places like this, because where I lived in Iraq, you weren't going to get a mortgage. Every home was purchased with cash. What's the unintended consequence of that? People stay in the family home for a very long time.
Yeah.
And you get multi-generational families living in the same structure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to live with 3 generations of your family, or do you want to buy a house today?
Mhm.
That's the freedom that a loan offers you. And you could take it or leave it. There's no rule that says you must go take a mortgage out. Stay in your familial home if that's what you prefer. Think about what life would look like if every time you needed a new car, you had to pay cash for it.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in a place where that was true. A lot of people didn't have cars. Most families had at most one, because that's really a hell of a cost to bear all at once. So, it seems to me that, we haven't even gotten to business loans. Can you get into business without a loan? Not in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
So the Western world, once it figured out how to finance risk, which is what loans do, exploded.
Yeah, because it's a really good thing.
And it works. It works remarkably well. It provides the consumer of the loan with the lowest possible rate and the offerer of the loan with the highest possible return.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there are forces that work in both directions.
And what you're literally doing is tapping into your future earnings.
That's right. That's exactly what you're doing. And you might say, as many people do, okay, I can just about afford this house right now. Okay, let's go ahead. And what you're really saying is, I bet I get a number of raises at work that make this very affordable over the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And that's generally what happens for people. Generally. You can't take all the risk out of anything.
Yeah.
But how many people do you personally know, Ant, who have lost their homes, been foreclosed on?
Yeah, I know some, not very, very few, but some.
And I don't know any. So it's kind of like when we talk about car safety, and we say, a long time ago, we all knew people who died in car accidents, and now we don't.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a long time ago, people lost their homes all the time.
Right, yes.
And now, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much. And that, generally speaking, I think shows that the system as it sits works pretty well. And yet we're left with the reality that right now, younger people, because of the price of the house on the one hand and the price of the loan on the other, just can't pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very difficult for a group of people. And I feel for them. I really do. I remember when I moved to the town we lived in together, interest rates were kind of high at the time.
Yep.
And I was paying over 5 on that house.
Yep, me too.
And that was painful. I remember when I went out looking at houses on a lousy assistant professor's salary. People don't know how little professors make, actually. But I was barely getting by. And we had to have a hard stop at $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way. And after the episode is over, I will tell you the story of when I got that mortgage, because it's hilarious. But there was a hard cap there. And that $200,000 was generally defined in no small part by the cost of the interest on the loan. Because once you get the price, now you have to figure out what the financing looks like, just like with the car. And there you were. So what's your prediction, Ed? You think this 50-year business is going to, A, happen, and B, take off?
If I had to guess, I would say the most likely thing is it happens, and there's a hue and cry about the banks gouging people because of the premium, because of the 50-year thing. And, there's a to-do about that, and then slowly it just fades away because everyone realizes this wasn't a good idea in the first place. If it had been, we would have had it.
Yeah, no, and I think it is a profoundly bad idea, which is why I think politicians will probably require it, and then banks will offer it because they have to, and smart people won't take it. Because what's $200 a month?
Right.
All right. To add 20 years to a mortgage for $200, that's craziness.
$200 a month sounds good when you're young and you could really use that extra $200 a month, and you don't realize until you're 30 years down the road that you could have been out from under this mortgage now, but you got another
20
two
years.
decades to go.
And not only that, but you're going to pay almost $1 million in financing fees.
Yeah.
On a $400,000 house. Ouch. Well, strange times we live in. So
And
I'm interested to see what happens next.
people may come back and say, yes, but you're not taking into account that the value of the house will appreciate over time. And two things here. First, appreciating over time doesn't change anything we've said. It makes the numbers different, but the principles that we've described here are all the same. Two, I would not bank on housing prices continuing to rise that much.
No, I think they're already not rising, and I think they're going to tumble.
Yeah, well, I don't know about tumble, but what was driving housing prices was the increase in the population. Over the course of my life, the number of Americans has doubled. And of course, they all need places to live, and so, of course, housing prices go up. Our population's topping out. We're not going to see a doubling over the next generation. And so you're not going to see housing prices continue to rise.
And as prices are high, demand goes lower, which is downward pressure on the entire market anyway. What can you do is really where you're left here, and people will buy houses to the degree that they're comfortable with the package that they're offered.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't terribly comfortable with an 8% package. People were incredibly comfortable 5 years ago with 2.8%,
mm-hmm.
right? And somewhere in between 2.8, I think it was 2.85 is the low point. Might have gotten to 2.7 for a day and a half, right? Something like that.
Right.
Between 2.7, say, and 8, somewhere in the middle there, probably more to the left than to the right, people are going to find a comfort zone again. And when rates get there, they'll start buying houses again.
Yep. And if rates ever do get back, I don't think they will. If they ever do get back to 2.8%, there's a different story here. Again, the principle remains the same, but the numbers move enough that maybe it starts to look a little bit attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, because what remind me of this is my saying that I don't think you're ever going to see 2.8% interest again, which made me think of inflation. Isn't that one of the things that President Trump said about this $2,000 check thing and his tariffs? That he said inflation is under control, or inflation is falling. I forget what it was.
Yeah, inflation is falling.
Good words about inflation.
Yeah, inflation is falling. That's the happy spin to put on it.
Yeah, and the truth is inflation is falling, but that's from June 2022 when it peaked on a month-over-month basis at 17%, month-over-month. So falling isn't, that great shakes given that where you came from.
Oh, and it could fall to zero and we're all still paying too much for everything.
Well, yeah, but the problem here is that there's every indication that inflation's going to settle about a percentage point higher than what we had prior to COVID.
Yeah, no, everybody seems to be saying 3.5. That's the best case scenario.
Yep. Prior to COVID, it was 1.52. Mm-hmm.
2 for decades.
Yep.
And that was the Fed's goal, to keep it at 2.
Yep.
Now the Fed can't keep it at 2 because the money supply increased so much that it's not possible.
And where that connects to mortgages is if your inflation rate is going to settle about a percentage point higher, then expect mortgage rates to settle at about a percentage point higher. So 2.8 was as good as it got before. 3.8 is going to be as good as it gets now.
But also expect the cost of the house to go up because every piece of raw material that makes the house has been inflated.
Right. Yeah. The price, not just the mortgage rate, but the purchase price of the house is going to be going up. Yeah.
And there's literally no way around that. The contractors have to make a living. Sorry, but it's true. Anyway, I guess that's not a particularly uplifting note to end on, but so it is. We'll see where this all lands.
Let me give an uplifting note that I don't think people appreciate. You touched on it earlier when you talked about mortgages and lending as being, I describe them as inventions because they actually are inventions. Humans came up with this
that's
thing.
perfectly fair. Perfectly fair.
And they make our lives so much better. And like any tool, they can be abused, right? But by and large, they really make our lives so much better. They make things possible that simply weren't possible before. One of my favorite books by Ken Follett, he writes a lot about life in medieval villages before the invention of things like loans. And you had a villager who's trying to save up for a business, and he's got to work for 30 years as an apprentice until he can save enough money to buy his equipment, because there's no such thing as a loan.
And maybe if it all works out, he can leave a struggling business to his son.
Right. Yes, exactly.
That's
the
case
best
scenario.
you can do. Yep.
Yeah. Which is, not particularly heartwarming.
Well, the heartwarming part is we live in a time when we have these wonderful inventions of, loans and all of the things that go with them that people give a bad rap, I think, to things like options and futures contracts and all of it. But all that stuff are the machinery behind the financial industry that makes everything possible.
Yeah. And as long as it's done right and well, there will never be a problem. But we all remember 2008 when it was done incorrectly and poorly. And and all kinds of problems emerged. And I would encourage you to go watch the movie The Big Short if you don't really have a grasp of what happened there. And I suspect it's going to happen again, but we'll find out when, not if.
I endorse the music, the movie The Big Short, but watch.
Yeah, there's one giant caveat.
The very last sentence. So he sets out beautifully what was going on with the financial crisis, but he doesn't hit the core of what the real problem was until the very last sentence of the movie.
Yeah, it too long didn't read, it's the government's fault.
Yeah.
And it only comes up in one sentence in the entire movie.
I think as well. If I'm remembering, it had a maybe to it. Like, well, maybe the Fed was there.
Could have done something differently. So, you should watch it knowing that they're not going to cover that appropriately. But they do a remarkable job making a very complex time relatively simple and straightforward. Great storytelling. Just great. Anyway, that is a more uplifting note. So we'll end it there. Ant, I'll see you next time. And until then, be nice to each other.
At Words and Numbers, we spend a lot of time talking about what's going on in the economy and the government. But fundamentally, all of this boils down to one thing. The greatest threat facing modern society is a lack of respect, that people who disagree somehow find it difficult, if not impossible, to discuss their differences in a civil manner. We at Civil are interested in upgrading civilization by encouraging people to engage with new ideas and ultimately engage civilly with each other. If you share this idea, please join us by subscribing at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.
And now that we're alone, I can tell you the story. And Ant, you've already heard this story, so you're just going to have to hear it again.
I love your stories, James. And I never remember.
That's great. That's just great. This is an interesting one because this happened when I moved to Pennsylvania, and I moved to Pennsylvania in 2005. And I moved there on a very low assistant professor salary, like I said in the main episode, and we had decided $200,000 was the outside limit of what we could afford. And even that was going to be pretty tough for a while. I was going to have to become creative and entrepreneurial and figure out how to bring more money into the house than simply my salary. But in order to get all this moving, you got to find a house and you got to bid on a house. But before you can do that, you have to talk to the bankers and get pre-approved for the mortgage. This is not the mortgage process. You can still be denied. I later found out you could still be denied a mortgage after you were pre-approved. So
really?
Pre-approved.
What is the point of being pre-approved then?
It doesn't seem to mean a damn thing. Anyway, I got pre-approved for $200,000 because that's what I asked for. And I walked in and the guy said, all right, give me your papers. And there was a number of different things. And I laid them all over his desk. And he kind of sat back in his chair and just looked at them and said, okay. And I said, okay, what? He said, you're pre-approved. I said, oh, well, that was easy. He said, yeah. And I said, do I get a letter? And he said, yep, have it drafted before you leave. I said, well, great. I guess that's all we need. And then I got this crazy idea. And I said, tell me something. I'm not asking for anything other than just two guys talking. What would you have approved me for? I only asked for two. What would you have given me? And he looked at the papers and he hemmed and he hawed for a minute. And he said, $450. And I said, and I quote, because remember, I'm looking for a house in August. I said, I would be homeless by Christmas. And he looked back at me and he said, and I quote, that wouldn't be my problem. Yep. And I've just given you the entire plot of The Big Short.
Let me go one addition. That it wouldn't be my problem. What he means is the bank would loan you the money and then the bank would sell your mortgage to the government and it would become the government's problem. But that is the exact thing that's going on with higher education right now, where schools or universities are happy to admit you, and you might say to the admissions counselor, what happens if when I'm done and I've got $80,000 in debt in this degree and I can't get a job? The correct answer is, it's not my problem.
Not my problem. And I'll go you one further. When I was working at your alma mater, St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, lest there be any doubt who, what, or where.
James is mad.
I am mad.
Name and name.
Actually, and you will be angry too, you would have been if you didn't already know this. The SAT was the standard we used at St. Vincent College for admission. And I'm here to tell you the SAT is a very good predictor of whether you will finish your first year of college.
Not finish college, finish the first year.
No, just first year. Mm-hmm. That's about what it's good for. And if you score under 800, and remember there were only two sections of the SAT back then, math and such, and verbal and such. If you scored under 800, there was virtually no way in hell you were going to finish out your first year of college successfully. Almost none. Unless there was pressure from the administration never to fail anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, people who can't read or do math do finish their first year of college. Then they finish their second year, their third year, and their fourth year because the administration deems it necessary for the survival of the college. And then
understand what that means, because I've been in this exact situation at another college. The deans will put pressure on you, and if you don't buckle, they will fire you.
That is, I can tell you with 100% certainty that is absolutely correct. Anyway, don't forget that these dim-witted students are now $100,000 in debt, have no career skills whatsoever, and go out onto a job market and end up making the same minimum wage they could have made 4 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
There's college for you. Now, am I saying that nobody should go to college? No, absolutely not. There are all kinds of people who should go to college. Should everybody go to college? No. No, everybody should not. And we've lost that lesson over the years.
The fundamental problem here, and we should do an episode again on this topic, the fundamental problem is one of incentives, that the college has no incentive to make sure that the student has marketable skills, because the student's paying upfront and then leaves.
And just as the banks aren't offering mortgages as a public service, so too colleges are not offering their product as a public service.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, private colleges are private. And they're all nonprofits, and that doesn't mean a damn thing. And then the public schools are bureaucracies that take on lives of their own. Nowhere do you find anybody operating with the purest of intentions. It doesn't work out that way in reality ever. You might, at a place like St. John's College in Annapolis or Santa Fe, you might find a glimmer of hope, right? Or at, what's the Catholic one? St. Thomas More? Is that the one in California?
Yes, right. Mm-hmm.
There are some shining stars out there. There are almost no shining stars out there. And that's
Almost
where we
none.
are. Almost.
And I'll say this as well. Parents ask me from time to time, okay, given all that you've said, how do I figure out which colleges are putting pressure on their faculty to just pass students?
They all are.
Well, they all are, but to a greater or lesser degree. I find a decent rule of thumb is look at the endowment, because the endowment's published. It's public information. Right. Endowment per student. The higher that number, let me say it the other way, the lower that number is, the more the institution depends on that tuition and the more pressure administration will put on faculty to pass students who shouldn't be passing.
Yep, that is absolutely correct. And I get questioned by parents from time to time too, not nearly as much as I once did, but still often enough. And all I'll say is this: your children might not belong at college, and that is not an insult, right? A welder is going to make more than an English major. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying anything other than your specific child might not belong at college. But I'll tell you what I did with mine. And like every other parent, I think my children are quite special. But Aunt, you've met my two girls. They really are. They are really smart, right? And I sent their asses to public school here in Arizona just as fast as I could because it was cheap. Mm-hmm. And an undergraduate education isn't worth what most undergraduate institutions charge, even after the financial aid package. It's not even close to worth it. So I told my girls, well, you can go here, or I'll give you the same amount and you can go anywhere else you want and you pay the difference. And they both looked at me like I was the worst person in the world. But, sometimes you have to say, I know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
And you don't. And both of them later in their college careers thanked me for making this the rule of the house because they graduated with no debt whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And that was such a head start compared to their friends. I mean, you want to say you can't put a price on that, but you can, and it costs zero. It's remarkable, right? And they got great educations. They're smarter now than they were going in, which is what you want. They're more mature and the whatnot. I myself went to state school. I would take advantage of it every time. It's where the bargain is to be found. But it's also where a bunch of lousy students are to be found. Yeah, if you go to state school, you have to steal a good education once you get there.
Yeah, but it matters so much more what you do when you get to the school than what school it is you go to.
That's right.
I had the same experience. You said it to parents that maybe your kid doesn't belong here. I actually said it to the student. My first year of teaching out of graduate school, and I was at a small college in West Virginia and teaching an MBA class. These are master's students, right? And they could not operate on the same level as the freshman business majors. And I know this. I gave first day of class, I gave multiple choice tests. So I haven't done anything to them yet. Gave multiple choice tests, same one. And the undergraduate freshmen did way better than the MBA students.
That's just sad.
There's a student there that was just having problems. I mean, serious problems. And I took the student aside and I said, look, you really need to think about that college might not be the right place for you. That your skill sets are pointed elsewhere. And next thing I know, I'm getting called down to the dean's office.
Yeah, you're going to get in trouble for that.
Yeah, and the dean says the student can make it here. We know that because we admitted the student. I didn't want to point out the circularity of the argument at that point, right?
But
the message was very clear: pass this student.
That's literally what begging the question is. When people say, well, that begs the question, that's not what that means. You think begging the question is exactly what Ant just did. And they did it at St. Vincent College, too, when I was there, because I remember learning about the 800 SAT and how they're all going to fail out. And I went to the provost and I said, well, if this is true, and it is, why do we admit so many of them? Because every year I would get a spreadsheet with all the admittees with all of their standardized test scores. Mm-hmm. And I could get you a percentage of the population at the school that was sub 800. They should never have been admitted. Mm-hmm. Not only there, anywhere. Mm-hmm. Right? That's what the test gets. It tells you that, no, these people are not going to survive in this environment. And he said, I know what you're saying. And I said, well, what the hell does that mean? He said, it means what it means. You're right. And I said, oh my God, they're making you do it.
Wow, the provost. And provost, for those of you who aren't in academic circles, provost is like the number 2 guy. He's right below the president.
Yeah, that's St. Peter.
Right, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. And he quit soon thereafter.
Yeah.
And went somewhere else.
Yep.
I don't know if they did it there as well. I referred to it as theft. Mm-hmm. Because you're just stealing money from these people.
You're much more polite. I refer to it as fraud.
Yeah, that's right. At another place I worked, I'm not going to mention the name of this place. It was the Institute for Humane Studies. We used to say things like, what's that word? Fraud? Is that the pronunciation? I can't quite remember. There is little by way of ethics anywhere you go. Anyway, I will name more names next week.
All right. Thank you for the story, James.
Yeah, you have and look, that's how I knew 2008 was coming. And I'm noticing the same sorts of warning signs right now. Mm-hmm. It's only anecdotal. I can't prove it, but it smells to me like we're walking down the same road again. We'll see. I'll catch you next time, Ant.
See you next time, Ed.
We'll think of something more uplifting to talk about next time. Have a good couple of days.
See ya.